Let's see the link. Golgotha, Skull Hill. Very close to it we have a crucifixion site, surrounded by a 1st century building. Further away we have a rich man's garden tomb with the seal stone missing. And over at the crucifixion site we have a stone that matches it in size precisely, enclosed in a crucifixion site. Who was it that in the 1st century of our era considered this site so important as to link the crucifixion site with the burial site nearby in the 1st century, the time of the early Christian church, the time of the apostles? Who was it that wanted to commemorate something here that was linked to something there? When these discoveries were going on, friends, there came word from a bishop who had the say as to whether the excavation could continue. He passed down the message, "You must cease work." Now, friends, that cave had not been found, if there was one. Ron was a Christian, a man of deep prayer, as were virtually all members of the team. And so prayers went up. They went something like this: Dear God, if you really do have in mind that we are to find something here to glorify your name, and if this work is to continue, and if that man is going to fight you and hold up this work, will you in some way that is suitable to you remove him so that we can continue the work? By the end of that week, the bishop dropped dead. By the end of the month, his successor gave permission for the work to continue. I tell you, it's a serious thing to stand against the will of God. Some very wonderful things had been found over this time, but still the object of the search had not been achieved. Eventually, all the cliff face had been excavated and there was nowhere further to go. And still there was no cave found. Over dinner one night, Danny spoke up. "Where do we go now?" "Well," suggested Ron, "why don't we break into the cliff face? It would be hard work. It would involve hammer and chisel, real hard work. But it was decided there was no other option. They could only try and see if there might be something hollow inside." To their relief, it wasn't long before they broke through the rock into the open space. Gradually they enlarged the hole, and behind it there appeared a cave. But if they expected something worthwhile for their pains, it was not to be. It turned out that this cavern was just a small part of an extensive honeycomb of natural caves and tunnels inside the mountain. There would pass 12 months on and off of arduous, heartbreaking toil for seemingly no results. One tunnel was so tight you had to exhale just to wriggle through. Then when you tried to take another breath, the passage was so narrow you could only half inhale again. And there were places with deep drops, 25, 40 feet down. Tunnels not all connected. Many hours were spent chiseling through cave walls, searching for adjacent tunnels. Each time these proved empty. One by one, team members began to lose hope. The owners of the land had granted a permit on condition that Ron restore the land to its original state when the work was done. On one occasion there were just 3 members of the party working. One was inside hacking away at the rock. Another was outside, in the trench, under a bush, for the shade, eating his lunch. And Ron was fiddling with the paper for the radar. Suddenly there was heard a voice from above, up on the earth pile. "God bless you, Ron Wyatt, for what you are doing." Ron looked up, and there was a tall man dressed like an Arab in clothes very much like those of biblical days. Ron knew that nobody was aware of what they were doing, only the members of the team and the antiquities man. Here was a total stranger who not only knew Ron's name but said he knew what they were doing. So Ron began to ply the man with questions. "Do you live around here?" "No." "Are you a tourist then?" "No." "Well, who are you? Where do you come from?" And after a long pause, the stranger replied, "I've just been to South Africa and I'm on my way to the New Jerusalem. God bless you, Ron Wyatt, for what you are doing." He turned and he walked away. Ron left his equipment, and as he was clambering up the earth pile, the team member eating lunch shouted, "I heard every word of that. I didn't see the man. Do you think we've been talking to an angel?" Ron ran after the man. There were workmen nearby. Ron asked them, "Did you see such and such a man who just came down here?" They replied, "Mr. Wyatt, no one came past here." He ran out to the street and asked the Arab hawkers, "Did you see that man?" They replied, "No, Mr. Wyatt, such a person did not come past here." May I state that with such an experience, the team was suddenly inspired to intensify their work. It was the very impetus they needed to keep going.
I have a request for 22-inch 2x4.
And so the work continued inside the tunnel systems. Of course, the physical strain was tremendous. 2 members of the team actually flew home with double pneumonia. The dust, the tightness inside was becoming unbearable. With one young man who always accompanied him inside, Ron continued on this particular afternoon. We'll call this Arab boy Rafat. He was young, about 27 or 28 years of age, and slim. And Rafat was a great help to the team because being so slim, so small, he could squeeze into crevices that might otherwise take hours to widen for the rest of the team to follow. And he could just go in with a torch and look around and see if that area held promise, or he might simply come back and suggest they go the other way. And this would save much time and frustration. So, this particular afternoon, Rafat was up front with Ron, and they were squeezing along. They came to a certain spot and saw a dark cavity ahead. In front of it was a stalactite hanging down. Here's the stub of the stalactite. The stalactite is in our possession as a team. It still retains a sweetish kind of smell. They knocked off the stalactite and Ron said to Rafat, "Crawl in and take a look." In an instant, Rafat tumbled out. "What's in there? What's in there?" he cried. "I'm not going back in there." He was trembling and shaking. In his eyes was sheer, complete and utter terror. Yet Rafat said he had seen nothing. Whatever his experience, it was stark and real since he left that chamber and the entire cave system, never to return. What was it that Rafat had sensed? Ron would never have given that chamber another look had it not been for Rafat's terror. Now Ron was cautiously excited. He decided to enlarge the hole and had crawled through. He looked at his watch. It was 2 p.m. Only 18 inches clearance, that's all he had. He lay on his stomach, inching forward with nothing but the flashlight in his hand, into a space that would prove to be a cavern. The beam of light shone forward over the huge pile of rocks. Something shiny caught his eye. He began moving the rocks one at a time. It was slow work. There were several objects in the chamber. These were covered over with black, dry rotted animal skins. Over these were dry rotted wooden timbers. And on top of the timbers were stones. And Ron came along over the stones between them and the ceiling. There was a moment when he caught a glimpse of something under the stones. It shone like gold in the torchlight. He spent some time removing the covering to see what was there. He saw gold moulding comprising an alternating pattern of a bell and a pomegranate. His heart raced. He knew what he was seeing. This was an object from the first temple, Solomon's temple, the table of showbread described in the book of Leviticus. Slowly and painfully he crawled over the rocks to the other side of the chamber. Ahead in the torchlight he glimpsed a black stone case. It had a flat stone top which was cracked completely in two. The smaller section of the cover was moved aside, creating an opening. Ron now knew what was in that stone case. It was now, with that instant realization, that Ron passed out. It was 2:45 p.m. when he came to, a mere 45 minutes after entering the chamber. Later, inserting a long pole through the opening at the top of the stone case, attempts would be made to photograph the ark. A Polaroid camera was brought in. The photos turned out foggy. A 35mm camera was brought in. The photos turned out foggy. A video camera was brought in. The photos turned out foggy. And Ron concluded that perhaps it was not time for the world to see this yet. In fact, in ancient times, the average person was not permitted to look upon it. Here, Jim Pinkowski, a team member, faithfully reproduces what is actually seen with the eye. I hear someone say, those figures don't look like angels. How do you know they don't? Have you ever seen an angel? Friends, what you are seeing here is what those ancient craftsmen actually made. psalmist, truth shall spring out of the earth. Can we take that literally now? Is this going to happen soon?
I'm going to show you this whole chamber. At times there would be, how many men in here, Dale, at one time? Seven,
Seven or eight, 9, 10.
And I'm looking straight up now.
In a few minutes we shall let you know the official reaction of the Israeli authorities. Stay tuned. Several more trips were made to the chamber. Eventually, Ron reported to the authorities what he had found. The immediate reaction was, "Don't tell anybody. Give us time to think what we should do." "But I've already told a few people," confessed Ron. "Well, what have you told them?" asked the antiquities officer. Ron replied, "I've revealed such and such." Realising that what is done, they then ordered Ron not to reveal any more details than he had already revealed. The man who was in charge of the Jerusalem sector of the Antiquities Department at that time, when the find was reported, Dan Bahat, a man who was taught at the Hebrew University and is the author of several books, wanted to see this for himself. And so he put on his old clothes, gear that wouldn't matter if it got torn or dirty, and he came and advanced toward the tunnel system. He had scarcely gone 3 paces toward the entrance when suddenly this strong, fit man collapsed, groaning on the ground. He lay in bed for 2 weeks, unable to move. After that, the man admitted, "My back has never given me trouble before. But I do know this, I'm not going in to try to look at the Ark of the Covenant again." The Israeli authorities do not know how to handle this discovery. The find has made them nervous. I believe there are two reasons. The first is political. Some time ago, a permit was granted to some Israelis to undertake an excavation under the Temple Mount, but it was soon reported that workmen had been seen lugging crates into the excavation tunnel. The authorities investigated and found that the tunnel had already penetrated to a spot under the dome of the rock, and explosives were being set in place, presumably to blow up the place. The Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, together named the Haram al-Sharif, comprise the third most important place for the Muslim people. Sabotage of the site might well provoke an Islamic jihad or holy war. You see, there are militant extremists among the Jews who want to get back the Temple Mount and build a third temple, and if they could lay their hands upon the Ark of the Covenant, which would be considered by them as the most precious object for such a temple, they would feel quite safe in provoking a war to accomplish that aim, if they knew that they had the Ark on their side. And so the Israeli government is very nervous about anyone laying their hands on the Ark or gaining access to it at this time. Government officials now regard this as a critical issue in which the safety of the people must come first. In view of a prospect of a negotiable peace in the Middle East, the present actions of the government are deliberately against any disclosure of what it knows. They have already restricted Israeli religious access to the sensitive Temple Mount above and below ground. The Israeli government desires to maintain good relations with the Arabs. It does not want to disturb the peace with the Arabs. The situation is explosive at any time. You can walk down the street and get blown up by a suicide bomber. You never know what's going to happen. And so this whole issue has become a political hot potato. Archaeology is currently being used as a weapon. It was just 1 week after one of our visits to the site in Israel that Prime Minister Rabin was assassinated, and the government was blaming one of those disaffected extremists. On a visit into the chamber, the torch was run along the ceiling, and there was found to be a crack in the ceiling. The crack was immediately above the crack in the lid of the stone case. The crack came down through the rock, leapt as it were through the air, then started again. Very, very odd. It was decided to investigate the crack in the ceiling. Let's get a metal tape measure, suggested Ron, and see if this comes out somewhere. And so, while one team member sat up by the ledge outside, Ron entered the chamber and began to push the rigid metal tape up through the earthquake crack in the ceiling. Up through the rock it went. It came out at the left-hand side of the elevated crosshole. The crack extended through 20 feet, 6 metres of solid rock. When Jesus died on the cross, he did not die of crucifixion. On the evening before Jesus went to the cross, he entered the Gethsemane garden on the east side of town. The disciples looked at his face, and they had never seen him so distressed. He said, "I'm going aside to pray for a while. You stay here and you do the same." And they watched him at a distance. He dropped down among those olive trees and began to pray. For some years, Jesus had been predicting his own death as a sacrifice for mankind. Now the moment had arrived. Jesus knew he was about to take upon himself the world's sins to be punished for them. He himself had done no sin. Sin was totally repulsive to him. He shuddered at the thought of the world's guilt descending upon him. His whole life had been leading to this hour. But now his human nature staggered under its horror. Was there no other way to save mankind? Nevertheless, Father, not as I want, but as you will. The horror of it shook him. And in the intense anguish, he again collapsed on the ground. He broke out in a sweat. The agony grew unbearable as he felt the crushing weight, the horror of the sins of the world descending upon him. And with the sweat, drops of blood oozed from his pores. The death process for our sins had already begun. Men in their wickedness chose to crucify him, but he gave himself willingly. Jesus died of his own choice.
Which of the two do you want me to release to you?
You! We're going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days. Save yourself. Come down from the cross, if you are the Son of God.
Jesus was placed on the cross at 9 in the morning. The Roman cross was an emblem of their sun worship. By nailing Jesus to the cross, they said, in effect, "We offer you to the mercy of the sun god." What an insult to the Creator. The sun continued to rise, and by midday it was right overhead. And then it was, friends, that God blacked out the sun. One historian says that the sun was blacked out as far as Rome, the centre of sun worship. The darkness continued for 3 hours. In that darkness, Jesus was alone. He was enduring the wrath of God against sin. Together they had shared eternity before the world was. And on earth, Jesus would rise early before daybreak, conversing for hours with his Father in heaven, to gain strength for his work with mankind during the day. They were closer than Siamese twins. But now, as the darkness descended, it seemed that even his heavenly Father had deserted him. The dreadful thought impressed itself. Even your Father in heaven won't want you now. All this sin you have taken upon yourself has doomed you. You are finished. It was these sins, my sins and yours, friends, that put Jesus through the agonizing terror of that final death that the lost will feel on the judgment day. Jesus was willing to die a death from which there was to be no resurrection, if it meant you and I could be restored to God's presence forever. My God, Jesus' cry pierced the darkness. Why have you forsaken me? How the Divine Father must have suffered with his Son. I can imagine him pressing close in the darkness, longing to intervene. But he must hold back and let the penalty be paid. It was Passover Day, the 14th day of the month Nisan on the Jewish calendar. Around 3 p.m., according to Jewish custom, the priests were to kill the Passover lamb. Back inside Jerusalem, in the temple, the priest was raising his knife. Suddenly, there was a loud ripping noise from inside the building. The priest turned with horror to see that great 3-inch thick temple curtain being ripped as by unseen hands from top to bottom. And the knife dropped from his nerveless hand, and the lamb escaped. At that same moment, outside the city, Jesus cried out, "It is finished." Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. And he died. Animal sacrifices would now have no more validity. The earth shook violently. At the moment of Jesus' death, the rock was torn open. Those who had been standing around the cross mocking were now afraid. Some of them feared the judgment day had come. And the Roman centurion in charge of the soldiers detached to the cross looked up and gasped, "Truly this man must be the Son of God." In their continuing hatred, however, the Jewish council of 70 men approached the Roman governor and said, "Sir, it's Friday afternoon. The Sabbath will be coming on very soon. It will be a disgrace to have these criminals hanging publicly during the Holy Sabbath. Now they're still alive. The crucifixion victims linger on day after day, as you know. They're not going to die in a hurry. So give us permission to break their legs so that they'll die fast and we can take them down from the cross before sunset." Yes, friends, crucifixion was a painful process. The body would go into cramps. It was difficult to breathe after a while. The only way a crucified victim could breathe was to press down on his feet upon the nails and try to lift his body so that he could get air into his lungs to continue breathing. But if his legs were broken, he would not be able to push himself up, and soon he would die. There were 2 thieves, one on each side of Jesus being crucified. They came to the first thief and broke his legs. Then they bypassed Jesus, who was in the middle, and they went to the thief on the other side and broke his legs. You might say, well, why did they do that? Why didn't they simply go in the right order? The first man, then the second man, then the third man. Why did they go 1, 3, then lastly come back to the man in the middle? Why didn't they go in the right order? 1, 2, 3. Well, friends, from our archaeological dig, I suggest a possible answer to this. Could it be that originally it had been planned for Jesus to be one of the 3 in those 3 lower cross holes? But in their hatred for Jesus, whom they'd been trying to get killed for years, they intervened time and time during the crucifixion because they just hated him so much. And now they tried to intervene again in the placement of the crosses. They said, look, this man is the worst criminal we've ever had. Let's dig another hole in the rock, higher than the other 3, and put him up higher where everyone can view him. Put him up as the star attraction of the crucifixion scene. And so the Romans dug another hole higher than the others and in the middle. And that would account for the fact that the soldiers, when they came to break the legs, did the 2 men lower down first, victim number 1, victim number 3, and then they had to climb up 4 feet, just over a metre, to the man in the middle who was higher up. It's a possible explanation. And so they came to Jesus, and they found he was dead already, and they did not break his legs. They were amazed. It was unheard of for one to die of crucifixion in just 6 hours. The ordeal of crucifixion could last for days. Something else had caused the death of Jesus. It was not the spear thrust. It was not the pain of the cross that caused Jesus' death, but a broken heart. The priests wished to make sure of the death of Jesus, and at their suggestion, I believe, a soldier thrust a spear into his side. And from the wound thus made there flowed two copious and distinct streams. That blood and water that flowed from his side was medical evidence that he died of a broken heart. It was broken by intense mental anguish because of his perceived separation from his Father for eternity. And he died of a physically ruptured heart due to his anguish in carrying the sins of the world upon himself. And friends, that soldier thrust the spear up into Jesus' side, and out came two copious streams, one of blood and one of water. And the blood came down out of his side, down past his legs, down over his feet. It poured into the crosshole and down through the crack in the rock that had been opened to receive it, then straight onto the lid of the stone case, and it sprinkled onto the mercy seat inside that stone case, the mercy seat of the actual Ark of the Covenant. And how do we know that? Because the crack has been closely examined and it shows copious amounts of blood having flowed down into it. It's still there, and it's human blood. Samples have been taken from the ceiling and from the stone case lid. The Bible says that mercy and truth, the truth is in the 10 Commandments, that we have broken God's law and are sinners. Mercy and truth are met together. Righteousness and peace have kissed each other. 600 years earlier, when Jeremiah placed the items in this cave, he had no idea that later the Messiah was going to be sacrificed over this very spot where that cavern was. When the Roman soldiers came along 6 centuries later to select that particular spot to crucify Jesus Christ, they had no idea that the mercy seat was waiting in the cavern below for that event. There are 2 mountains in the Bible called Mount of God. The first is Mount Sinai, where the 10 Commandments were written on tablets of stone. The second is Mount Moriah, where the blood was spilt. On Mount Sinai, God wrote with his own finger those imperishable 10 Commandments. And then the Son of God came with his own blood and sprinkled it on the mercy seat above those identical tablets of the 10 Commandments. That's where mercy met truth. There are other objects in this cave. On the floor, near the stone case, 7 oil lamps were found. Lamps such as this one. Now, an interesting thing about these lamps is that there is soot on one side of them. It would have been impossible for Jeremiah and his men to come through the tunnel system that Ron entered. After all, they did not have much time with the Babylonian soldiers at hand. And of course there would not be sufficient space through such a tight tunnel complex to carry the items. There just had to be another way in. And then these lamps were discovered on the ground very close to the stone case. They all had the soot in the same direction, and the soot extended onto the stones beside the lamps. And that showed that there had been a breeze coming from the opposite direction, and that breeze must have been through the original entrance to the cave. And so a probe was made of the cave wall, and there was found to be a false wall of stones and behind that there was a tunnel. Turning to the left, the tunnel was blocked after a short distance with stones to the ceiling. Again, in the opposite direction, it was blocked after just a few feet. Those men who hid the treasures had been careful to ensure that the chamber would not easily be found. And so, friends, after some time, subsurface interface radar was brought into play, and there was found a cavity extending outside the city wall of Jerusalem from the vicinity of Solomon's Quarry, sometimes called Zedekiah's Quarry. As far as could be determined, it ran along about 20 feet, about 6 metres under the ground, in the direction of Skull Hill. And when entrance is eventually made again into the chamber, this will be the way it is done. And if anything ever comes out of this cavern, that should be the way it will come out. Mary Nell, Ron's wife, is here seen crouching at the entrance to the tunnel.
Now, what I wanted to point out to you here is in front of me you see some large stones that are blocking an entrance into a chamber. Now, in order to conceal the chamber, they couldn't just block the chamber entrance itself, otherwise this would call attention to it. So they put up a veneer that went around the escarpment some distance, and this would at least confuse anybody that was looking for an entrance and perhaps make them believe that the stone veneer was there for some other reason. Now, this wall here was put up very hastily. They have had mortar back to Babylonian and pre-Babylonian times, and this wall, as you will see, instead of mortar, they used some red clay. Now, this tells us that they did all of this in quite a hurry. So given all of this information and the fact that I was in a chamber in this general location, however, it is a little confusing once you crawl around through these tunnels to try to keep oriented if you don't have a compass on you. All right, now, as we're down here with a lot of debris over us, quite enough to bury us, and some future archaeologists, if time lasts long enough, would find our remains, that is too much vibration down in this area and would trigger earth slides, which we have experienced several of. So we're going to close this operation down at this point in time and go back and get some metal framing material or shoring material to shore this up so that we can come in here and do this reasonably safely.
Okay, Randy, what do you think of the situation there?
I think we got a deep hole we're working in. I'm hoping for success soon. We're praying for it.
The second reason why the Israeli government does not know what to do with this discovery is a religious one. Judaism does not accept Jesus Christ as the Messiah. What if it were to be officially announced that the man who died on Calvary that Passover day, executed by Jewish leaders as an impostor, crucified for blasphemy, was actually the Messiah whose blood had gone onto the mercy seat which was waiting to receive it. Judaism worldwide will be shaken to its roots. Millions of Jewish people will be forced to face the decision whether to acknowledge this man, Yeshua, as the Messiah. The consequent upheaval could trigger political instability as well. It might even bring down the government of the day. The government is sitting on a volcano. Is there a divine plan in this discovery of the Ark? Will something happen soon? I believe so. Certain Jewish rabbis have long believed that the Ark of the Covenant will be exposed at the time when the Messiah is to appear. And indeed, today there is a growing expectation that the Messiah will soon appear. Prophecies fast fulfilling are leading us to the most momentous events of all history. I believe that people who follow their Lord will soon face the greatest crisis ever. More recently, as we have flown into London's Gatwick or Heathrow airports, something has changed. In the past, when a traveller approached the customs area, there was a sign which said, "Citizens of the United Kingdom, this way," and "All others, this way." But now, as one arrives, the sign United Kingdom or Great Britain has been taken down, and in its place is a sign which says, "Citizens of the European Community, this way, and all others this way." Friends, national boundaries are on their way down. Referring to the emerging United Europe, the December 9, 1991 issue of Time magazine printed this cartoon of a woman sitting upon a beast. The very symbolism used in the prophecy of Revelation 17, referring to a power which shall emerge in the end times. In 1975, the Club of Rome produced a blueprint for world government in which the whole world is to be divided into 10 economic zones, with one person as a ruler of each region, who will answer to one world ruler at the top. Biblical prophecy says, "These will have one mind and shall give their power and strength to the beast." A beast meaning a political power. It will be a one world political power. Biblical prophecy states that shortly before the return of Jesus Christ to interrupt human history, there will emerge a new world order in which national boundaries will mean very little. The prophecies of Revelation state that this new world order will draw together the nations of the world under one common dictatorship. And even now, a unified global system is being put into place by a group of powerful men working behind the scenes, men with almost unlimited financial resources who want a global government. And we're being raced into it whether we like it or not. There will emerge a one-world economy. David Rockefeller, the powerful leader of the Council for Foreign Relations, said this: "All we need is the right major crisis and the nations will accept the new world order." Some economists suggest that for this to occur, there may well be triggered an economic disaster in which the stock market will come crashing down overnight. The scenario they paint would be that on a Friday evening everything will close at a peak, and on Monday morning the markets will reopen way down, and then there will be billions, yes even trillions of dollars lost by people all over the world. Property prices will collapse and all mortgaged properties will come under the control of the bankers. Because the one world people want control, and to control it they have to bring it down and have their own one world monetary system to replace it. And all food supplies will be under their control. Living in the cities will be hazardous. Perhaps it may be time for some of us to consider moving out. And there is a one world religion being planned. Are you aware of that? friends, it is coming. It's coming rapidly. When the world is reduced to chaos by an economic collapse, I believe that will be the time for the tremendous move that is now being planned to come back to religious laws. It will be argued, see what's happening? We're not being blessed. We need these laws to force people to do it our way. Religious laws will be issued, which are already on the planning board, which, although seemingly good and moral, will be contrary to the original commands of God. Biblical prophecy states that eventually economic sanctions will be imposed against people who will not keep these laws, so that they cannot even buy or sell. Everyone will receive a number. There'll be something called the mark of the beast, and this will be in contradistinction to what prophecy calls the seal of God. You see, God has placed his seal in his law. He says, seal up the law among my disciples. There are two sets of laws, God's laws and man's laws. Man's laws will be enforced by the New World Order. Right now, the governments of the world are in league to regulate peace efforts and environmental and trading practices. This is very well known to us all. But behind the scenes, the foundation is already being laid to present a set of universal spiritual laws. And this, friends, is where the attempt will be made to enforce the conscience. It will be decreed that everyone on earth keep one unified day. Everybody, be they Jews or Muslims or infidels or Christians, will be required to observe the environmental Sunday, whether they want to or not. You say, well, what about the Muslims who keep Friday? What will they do when they're forced? What about Christians and Jews who keep Saturday? What about those who want to keep Sunday without being forced to keep Sunday? Now, friends, one of the most priceless attributes of our Creator is his love of freedom. In the beginning, he gave us freedom of choice. Freedom either to love him or to spit in his face. That's one of the things I love about God. He's a champion of freedom. And this is something that you and I should cherish very deeply. No person on earth has the right to order you and me in spiritual matters. The Lord himself says we have a choice. Choose you this day whom you will serve. As we noted, the Ark of the Covenant was so called because it contained, quote, the words of the covenant, the 10 Commandments. The Scripture says, he hath commanded his covenant forever. And I believe that when the time comes that the spiritual laws are being debated and about to become the law of the land, I believe that at this time, friends, the tablets of God's 10 Commandments written with his own finger will come out as a witness to the world before the fury breaks, so that everyone will have a freedom to choose upon enlightened knowledge. In God's perfect time, the Ark of the Covenant will be a witness. He says, my covenant will I not break. Did you know that the only time God spoke audibly and publicly to a group of people, millions of people, was when he spoke his 10 Commandments? He says, I will not alter the thing that has gone out of my lips. And Jesus himself said, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle, that's one dot of an I or one cross of a T, shall in no wise pass from the law till all be fulfilled. And I ask you now, have heaven and earth passed? Not yet. And when the entire world can see that very ark of God's own presence, then they will see for themselves that his law is real, that his law remains. And friends, this will go like shock waves across the world, challenging each person to come to a decision either to serve the Lord or to obey man. In the revelation prophecy of events just before Jesus' return, when human laws enforce the mark of the beast, as it is called, God's faithful people are described as those who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. You see, this is a showdown, and there will be no compromise. If you stand for Jesus, he will stand for you. The prophecy of Daniel tells us that at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people. And there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. That's God's book of life. You need not be afraid of what's coming. I would hope that anything I have just revealed to you will not make you afraid, but will make you rather aware and prepared. To be forewarned is to be forearmed, isn't that correct? Many of you may be out in the forests or the mountains, even hiding from powers that seek you. This has already happened in times of history in the past, and we are told in the prophecy that the times ahead, brief though they may be, are going to be as intense as any times in the past. But the Lord promises you will not starve, your bread and your water shall be sure. It is all very well to find the Ark of the Covenant, but what is the purpose of all this? In seminars worldwide, I stress that these discoveries are part of what the Lord himself is doing to prepare the world for his coming. May I ask you, are you prepared for that event? If not, why not just simply admit to God that you have done wrong? All of us are sinners. Look to Jesus to rescue you from your wrongs, and then ask for God's Holy Spirit to change your life. The Lord has now linked earth to heaven with a tie that can never be broken. He loves you. He made you. He died for you. How are you going to respond?